She looked him up and down, called him a nobody, and moved on. What she didn't know, he was the man quietly gathering the evidence that would destroy her career. They said Judge Corliss Denham didn't waste time, and that morning proved it. It was 9:06 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in February, and courtroom 2B in the Winnebago County Courthouse was already tense. The kind of tension you feel in your chest before you even realize you're holding your breath. A few attorneys shuffled papers. The court clerk called names without looking up. No pleasantries, just business. Judge Denham sat high behind the bench like she'd been carved into it. Early 60s, sharp chin, hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt. She wore her robe like armor, tapping her pen with a rhythm that said she had no patience for delays, questions, or anything resembling disagreement. The next name on the docket, State of Illinois, Clarissa Wynne. Her case wasn't unusual. Petty theft, second offense, minor property damage. But what happened next? That wasn't routine. A man stood from the second bench row and approached the podium with calm precision. Mid to late 40s, well-groomed beard, dark gray overcoat. No briefcase, no badge. Just a small leather notebook in one hand. His voice was calm, measured. "Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Reuben Cassell. I'm here as a procedural advisor to Ms. Wynne. I've reviewed the—" Judge Denham didn't let him finish. She narrowed her eyes and leaned forward, lips tight. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Reuben paused, blinked once. "I'm assisting the defense." "Are you licensed to practice in this state?" She cut in, her voice louder now, making sure the gallery could hear. "No, ma'am. I'm not representing her in a legal capacity, but—" Denham waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Then I'm not interested in hearing from you. I have a courtroom full of actual attorneys waiting. We don't have time for nobodies wasting this court's resources." You could feel the room shift. A few heads turned. One woman looked up from her phone. The court reporter stopped typing for a second. Even the bailiff shifted in his stance like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to intervene. Reuben didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, stepped back from the podium, and took a seat in the last row. No visible anger, no smart remark. He opened the notebook, jotted something down, and stayed silent for the rest of the hearing. Clarissa Wynne's case lasted 3 minutes. Bail conditions reaffirmed. Next case called. And just like that, Reuben was gone. No one saw him leave. He didn't speak to anyone else. But his silence didn't feel like retreat. It felt like a decision. Back at the clerk's desk, nobody said anything. But people were thinking. That tone, that word. Nobody. It didn't feel professional. It didn't feel right. Something about it stuck to the walls. One of the public defenders, a young woman named Lydia Crowley, whispered to the colleague beside her. "She's going to regret that." The colleague gave her a look. Not agreement, not denial. Just that raised eyebrow look people give when they know something might be coming, but don't want to say it out loud. Because Judge Denham had power. And power like that? People usually protect it, until they can't. But what nobody in that courtroom knew, what Judge Denham definitely didn't know, was who Reuben Cassell really was. Reuben Cassell wasn't the type to react quickly. He never raised his voice, never rushed a word. He was the kind of man who knew the value of silence and the damage of underestimating it. For most of his life, people tried to size him up by the surface. Too quiet, too plain, too polite. But underneath was a razor-sharp mind built on 2 decades of internal investigations, federal oversight, and watching powerful people talk themselves into trouble. Reuben had been appointed Chief Inspector of Internal Judicial Affairs just 4 months earlier. The job wasn't flashy. No press conferences, no interviews, just a mandate. Investigate reports of misconduct in Illinois courtrooms, quietly, thoroughly, without warning. That morning in Rockford hadn't been random. Denham's courtroom had come up on his radar 6 times in 2 years. Not enough for a public scandal. Just enough whispers to suggest something was off. Anonymous complaints about her tone, her treatment of defendants who didn't look like her, especially the ones representing themselves. A tendency to cut people off, a habit of mocking those without a formal education. Nothing explosive, just a pattern that smelled like smoke. So Reuben drove down from Springfield under a different name, with no badge, no assistant. He wanted to see it for himself, hear her words, watch her body language. He believed in truth, but he believed in proof even more. He'd arrived early, watched her come in. The bailiff seemed to tense when she passed. One of the public defenders whispered something about, "Just survive the morning." The temperature in that room wasn't just about winter outside, it came from her chair. When she called him a nobody, that was the confirmation he didn't expect to get so quickly. But Reuben didn't react the way most people would. He didn't ask for respect. He didn't remind her who he was. That wasn't his way. He knew that power often revealed itself more clearly when no one's watching. And now he had it. Her own words, said publicly, recorded on the court's feed, witnessed by nearly a dozen legal professionals. By the time he got back to his car, he had already written the first 3 bullet points of his report. He sat in the driver's seat, eyes focused, engine still off. Verbal dismissal of procedural advisor without due cause. Use of the term nobody, directed at a non-disruptive individual. Lack of professional inquiry into credentials before issuing public reprimand. He paused. Then added, "Courtroom reaction indicates this is not an isolated incident." He didn't need to make it dramatic. Facts would do just fine. Later that afternoon, Reuben made 2 quiet phone calls. One to the oversight board to notify them of a pending formal review. The other to a data analyst in his department named Bryn Ashford. Bryn was known for digging deep into digital archives and pulling patterns from years of court footage and transcripts. Reuben asked her to compile everything she could on Judge Corliss Denham's rulings, transcripts, courtroom video, anything public and private that might indicate a pattern. He didn't raise his voice, just said, "Start from 7 years back. Flag every hearing with a self-represented defendant. Filter by race, gender, and sentencing length." Bryn paused. "Are we expecting something major?" Reuben took a breath, eyes still on the notebook in his lap. "I think we already got it on tape." But before anything could be filed or made official, he had to make sure. If Denham was what he suspected, the court system had a rot deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Judge Corliss Denham's chambers weren't anything grand. Just 2 large windows, an old bookshelf stuffed with outdated legal volumes, and a thick wooden desk that had been in that room longer than she had. But to her, that room was a fortress, a place where she didn't have to filter her words, where formality fell away and the robe came off. Figuratively, if not literally. That afternoon, with court adjourned and the hallway emptying out, she paced behind her desk, muttering as she flipped through the next day's schedule. 3 more public defenders tomorrow, and another one of those TikTok attorneys. Can't wait. Her assistant, a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s named Velina Morse, stood quietly beside a filing cabinet, arms crossed. Velina had only been working with the judge for 5 months. Fresh out of law school, sharp, eager, and still idealistic. She heard things in that office she wasn't sure she should be hearing, but she took notes, nodded when expected, and stayed in her lane. Today, though, something had shifted. Velina cleared her throat. "Judge, about that man from the Wynne hearing, Reuben Castle. Do we know who he was?" Denham waved her hand. "Some street paralegal trying to play courtroom hero. You heard how he introduced himself. Probably Googled a few legal terms and thought he'd test me." Velina hesitated. "He didn't really interrupt, though. He was polite." Denham's eyes snapped up. "You think I was too harsh?" Velina didn't answer right away. She looked at the bookshelf, then the carpet, then back at the judge. "I just think maybe calling him a nobody was too strong, especially in front of everyone." Denham leaned back in her chair and scoffed. "You're young. You think court is about fairness and feelings. It's not. It's about control. If I lose control in that room, I lose respect. And respect is the only thing keeping this system from eating itself alive." Velina didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. She gathered some paperwork and quietly walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Down the hall, the bailiff, Jeremy Haskins, was sipping coffee at his post. As Velina passed, he gave her a look, not unkind, just knowing. "You're starting to see it too, huh?" Velina slowed. "What do you mean?" Jeremy exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the chambers. "She's been like this for years. Picks who she talks down to. Depends on the face, the tone, the shoes. You work with her long enough, you know when it's coming." Velina glanced around. "Does anyone report it?" He shook his head slowly. "Some tried. Nothing sticks. She's smart. Never swears, never yells, never threatens. Just enough to make you feel small." Velina didn't say anything more. But as she walked back to her desk, she opened her laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Reuben Castle. What she found surprised her. A short article buried in a legal newsletter. New appointment to internal judicial affairs. Background in ethics investigation, federal auditing, procedural reform. Former assistant U.S. attorney. Married. No children. Known for discretion. She leaned back in her chair. That wasn't a street paralegal. That was someone with pull. Someone who could make reports stick. Meanwhile, across town, Reuben sat at a hotel desk, laptop open, reviewing a courtroom transcript from 6 months ago. Denham had cut off a defendant mid-sentence and issued a contempt warning for attitude. No swearing, no threats, just tone. He flagged the section and kept scrolling. But as Reuben connected dots and Velina asked quiet questions, Judge Denham had no idea the walls were already closing in. By Thursday morning, Judge Denham's courtroom was running on autopilot. She hadn't thought once about Reuben Cassell since the moment he left. In her mind, he was just another oddball trying to sneak influence into a space that demanded structure. But elsewhere, the pieces were moving fast. At precisely 8:14 a.m., Reuben hit send on a confidential file upload from his hotel room. The contents: a preliminary findings report, 3 flagged video clips, and a request for full archival access to Courtroom 2B's audio transcripts dating back 7 years. The system pinged twice, confirming receipt. By 9 Bryn Ashford, his analyst back in Springfield, had already combed through 86 separate hearing logs tied to Judge Denham. She hadn't stopped working since his call. Her screen glowed with color-coded notes, statistical overlays, and audio tags. She called Reuben. So far, 17 flagged cases where the judge interrupted non-attorney speakers in under 10 seconds. 14 of those were black or Latino. Reuben didn't respond immediately. Bryn kept going. She speaks 22% fewer words in hearings with non-white defendants. Her tone? More aggressive. I pulled sample transcripts for comparison. With white defendants or private attorneys, she's civil, methodical. With everyone else? She cuts, mocks, redirects. It's all in the data. Reuben rubbed his chin. Any written complaints? 3 formal, 7 anonymous. One even mentioned her calling someone irrelevant. Bryn paused. But guess what name showed up in one of them? Castle? Nope. Velina Morse. She filed a vague statement last week. Didn't name Denham, but it was clear. Reuben closed his laptop and stood by the hotel window. Outside, snow was starting to fall, thick flakes against the glass. She's paying attention, he said. At the courthouse, Velina was more than paying attention. She was watching her own desk like it might turn on her. That morning, she'd received an email from a private account. No signature, just a line. You're not wrong. Be ready. She didn't know who sent it, but it shook her more than she let on. Meanwhile, Judge Denham was presiding over a pre-trial conference involving a single mother facing eviction fraud. The woman was soft-spoken, hands trembling as she tried to explain a missed filing deadline. Denham cut her off within 40 seconds, scolding her for playing games with the system. The public defender winced. And Reuben? He watched the feed from his laptop. The entire session was being streamed internally as part of the pilot transparency program for judicial accountability. Denham hadn't remembered that detail. Few judges ever did. He clicked the timestamp and noted, mocking tone during hardship testimony, no clear attempt to listen. He added it to the report. By afternoon, the review team in Springfield had enough to escalate. A formal inquiry was opened, quietly, as protocol required. But it meant two things. Judge Denham would be notified within 2 hours, and an on-site evaluation team would be sent to observe proceedings under the guise of a training review. Reuben knew what would come next. Most judges either toned things down or acted defensive. But Denham, he wasn't sure yet. That evening he called Bryn again. "If you were me," he asked, "would you walk back into her courtroom next week?" Bryn didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Let her show you who she is." Again, Reuben smiled faintly. That's the plan. But Denham was about to learn she hadn't just insulted a man. She'd triggered a system built to hold people like her accountable. Friday morning brought with it more than cold wind. It brought eyes. It started small. A local blog run by a retired journalist named Stan Bearden posted a grainy courtroom still, along with a few bold lines. Judge refers to black advisor as nobody during hearing. Who was he really? No clickbait, no fluff, just facts. But it was enough. By noon, the article had been shared nearly 800 times. A civil rights group in Peoria reposted it with a sharp caption. "It's 2025, and this is how courtrooms still treat black professionals." The story moved fast, faster than anyone inside the courthouse expected. Judge Denham first heard about it when her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Judge Orrin Bexley. "You're in the news. Call me." She didn't. Instead, she opened her laptop and found the article herself. Her face frozen mid-sentence, eyes narrowed. Below it, a short paragraph confirming that Reuben Cassell was, in fact, the Chief Inspector of Internal Judicial Affairs. She stared at the screen, the color slowly draining from her face. Across the hall, Valina tried to keep her head down, but people were whispering. In the hallway, in the clerk's office. Even Jeremy the bailiff had turned his phone face down and wasn't smiling like he usually did. Inside a nearby break room, 2 public defenders, one Latino, one white, stood near the coffee machine, trading low murmurs. "He's not just auditing," said one. "He's here for her. I heard she's already under formal review." "Good," said the other. Should have happened a long time ago. By 2 o'clock, the story had spread to regional outlets. Local radio hosts were talking about it too. One host, Tamara Green, opened her segment with a clipped recording of the hearing. Denham's voice filled the car radios of hundreds of listeners. "We don't have time for nobody's wasting this court's resources." No context, no tone, just those words. By late afternoon, the protesters came. Just a few at first. Signs that read "Dignity and Justice" and "Accountability Now." By 5 o'clock, nearly 24 people stood outside the courthouse in heavy coats, holding thermoses and small battery-powered speakers playing audio from past hearings. A man who'd once represented himself in Denham's court gave a short speech on a crate, voice cracking from the cold. "I didn't think anyone would believe me back then. But now, hearing her say that out loud, I feel seen." Reuben wasn't among the crowd, but he watched the live stream from his hotel. He took notes, not on the protest, but on public response. He believed in systems, but he believed in people even more. People had to push the system to move. Inside her office, Denham sat still, blinds drawn, desk clean. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a call. She answered with a sharp tone. "This is Denham." On the other end, a senior administrator from the oversight board. "Judge Denham?" the voice said, cool and formal. "We're notifying you of an official audit into courtroom conduct, case management, and language used during proceedings over the past 7 years. You'll receive documentation by Monday. Until then, please prepare for temporary observation by board members starting next week." She didn't respond right away. The voice continued. "Also, per protocol, your staff has the right to request reassignment during the review period." Click. Denham sat in silence. In the next room, Valina packed her tote bag without saying a word. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she wouldn't be standing beside the bench on Monday. But what Denham failed to grasp, even now, was that this wasn't just a political headache. It was personal. For Reuben, for the community, and for every person she'd silenced without a second thought. Monday came heavy. There was a tension in the courthouse that people couldn't name, but everyone felt it. Fewer greetings in the hall. Doors stayed closed longer. Eyes darted just a second too long before looking away. Judge Denham entered through the side door, coat pressed, expression neutral, but the confidence that usually hung around her like a second robe? It was gone. In courtroom 2B, 3 people sat in the second row, not reporters, not clerks, observers from the Judicial Review Board. One of them was Reuben Castle. He didn't wear a suit that day, just a simple dark sweater, quiet shoes, no briefcase. But he stood out anyway. His presence was enough. Denham clocked him immediately when she entered. She hesitated for half a second before sitting, and it didn't go unnoticed. The first 2 hearings passed with robotic precision. She let attorneys speak without interruption. She used phrases like, "Thank you for clarifying," and "Let's make sure we understand fully." A few of the regulars looked around, confused. But by the 3rd case, the facade cracked. The defendant, a young man named Terrell Gaines, was nervous. He stuttered through his answers. His public defender asked the court for a continuance due to delayed documentation. It was a common request, nothing unusual. Denham paused, lips pressed thin. The courtroom went quiet, waiting. And then she slipped. "This is the 2nd time you've asked for more time. This is a courtroom, not a daycare." A low breath rolled through the gallery. Someone shifted in their seat. Reuben wrote something down. The public defender responded calmly. "Your Honor, I'd just remind the court that discovery was delayed by the prosecution." Denham straightened, her tone tighter. "I'm aware. Let's proceed." It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. It was enough to show she couldn't help herself. After the hearing, the observers stood. Reuben didn't say a word. He simply nodded to the clerk and stepped into the hallway. Denham didn't look at him until 3 hours later, when she was called into a closed-door conference room on the 2nd floor. Inside, a long table, 2 board members, a legal ethics officer, and Reuben Castle. She walked in slow, her shoes quiet against the tile. When she sat, no one spoke at first. Then Reuben looked up from his folder. "Judge Denham," he began, calm as ever, "do you remember referring to a court participant last Tuesday as a nobody?" She didn't answer immediately. "I remember someone trying to insert themselves into court procedure without standing," she said. "I handled it as I saw fit." Reuben nodded once. "And did you verify who I was before making that decision?" She blinked. Her throat moved, but no words came. Reuben leaned forward slightly. "Because I wasn't there to test you. I wasn't there to provoke you. I was there because your courtroom had been flagged for repeat concerns. I came with no assumptions. I waited to see for myself." He paused. "And I did." Silent. One of the board members added, "We've reviewed 42 hearings. The pattern is clear. Disproportionate interruptions, inconsistent tone, language that crosses into public humiliation. Your record is under scrutiny, Judge Denham." Denham's hands were clasped together on the table. Still, silent. Reuben continued, his voice still calm. "You've had control in that room for a long time. But control without fairness isn't justice. It's performance. For the first time in a long time, Corliss Denham didn't have a rebuttal. But what she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that a single word, one careless moment, had opened a door that wouldn't close quietly. The board didn't drag it out. By Thursday, a formal statement had been released. Judge Corliss Denham would be placed on administrative suspension pending a full disciplinary hearing. The announcement came not through headlines or social media, but by a quiet press release on the Oversight Board's official site. Still, people found it. A local news station ran a short segment that night. They showed a still of Denham walking briskly out of the courthouse, face tight, flanked by her attorney. No words, just footage. And then they cut to Reuben Castle, giving a short interview outside the building. He didn't speak like a man trying to tear someone down. He spoke like a man tired of watching the same script play out. No one enjoys holding others accountable, Reuben said, his tone steady. But when someone holds authority in a room where people come for justice, they have to treat every person with dignity, whether that person wears a suit, a uniform, or a second-hand coat. Justice doesn't measure your title. It measures your character. That quote made it to social media. It didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. It landed. Meanwhile, inside her home on the north side of town, Denham stared at the television with the volume turned down. She sat on the edge of her couch, still in her court shoes, one heel dangling off the edge of her foot. The phone hadn't rung all day. Not from friends, not from colleagues. No one had her back now. The silence around her wasn't peace. It was consequence. She walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. A half-empty bottle of aspirin sat by the sink. She hadn't slept much. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Reuben's face. Not angry, not smug. Just still. Just certain. The hearing was still weeks away. She had time to build a defense, time to spin it. But deep down, she knew. She hadn't slipped once. She hadn't said something she didn't mean. That moment with Reuben, the word nobody, that was who she'd been for years, uninterrupted. Back downtown, Reuben stood in front of a different courtroom now, a smaller one. He was speaking to a group of law interns about judicial behavior. His voice was calm, but each word landed with purpose. Here's the truth. Bias doesn't always wear a hood or carry a flag. Sometimes it sits behind a bench. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it speaks softly. But it always leaves marks. One of the interns raised a hand. Do you think Judge Denham meant it? Or was it just a moment of stress? Reuben looked at her. I don't care if she meant it, he said. I care that she said it without hesitation. That tells me everything I need to know. He closed his notebook and glanced toward the window. Every time someone walks into a courtroom, they bring their entire story with them. Trauma, fear, hope, everything. You have no idea what that moment means for them. Don't be the reason they stop believing the system can work. After the session, Reuben stepped outside, took a long breath, and let the winter air hit his face. He wasn't happy, but he was at peace. He didn't want her destroyed. He didn't need headlines. What he wanted, what he always wanted, was change. But as word spread, and conversations sparked in courtrooms across the state, it became clear. This wasn't just one judge. It was a reminder, a line in the sand. And maybe, just maybe, someone else would think twice before speaking carelessly from the bench. By the time spring rolled around, the energy in Rockford's legal circles had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks or sweeping reforms overnight. But people started talking, openly. Clerks spoke with more confidence. Public defenders felt less like they had to brace for battle. And for the first time in a long while, some defendants walked into courtroom 2B and didn't feel like the walls were leaning in on them. Judge Corliss Denham never returned to the bench. Her resignation came before the official hearing. No press conference, no apology, just a formal letter to the board citing personal reasons and a desire to step back from public service. Those closest to her knew what that meant. She wasn't pushed. She stepped down before she could be removed. Pride, even in retreat. Valina Morse, her former assistant, accepted a clerkship with the appellate court in St. Louis. She left Rockford quietly, but not before sending Reuben a handwritten note. Thank you for making someone listen. He kept the note folded in the back of his notebook, next to his list of flagged courtrooms across the state. Reuben didn't celebrate. He moved on to the next city, the next courtroom, the next whisper of misconduct. That was the job. Quiet work. Necessary work. But this one stayed with him longer than most. Not because of the scandal, not because of the headlines, but because of what it revealed. That sometimes all it takes to break through arrogance is a quiet voice with the power to write things down and make people listen. Months later, he gave a guest lecture at a law school in Bloomington. A student asked him what made him get into judicial oversight in the first place. Reuben thought for a second before answering. "When I was a kid," he said, "my cousin got sentenced to a year in jail for breaking a store window. Judge barely looked at him, didn't even ask for a statement, just called him a statistic, and moved on. That stayed with me. I didn't become a lawyer to win. I became one to watch, because when people know someone's watching, they behave differently." He looked around the room. "And when they think no one's watching, that's when you see who they really are." That line stuck with the students long after the lecture ended. Back in Rockford, the courthouse continued its daily grind. Hearings resumed. New judges took the bench. But one thing had changed: awareness. The feeling that someone might be listening, watching, writing. That alone was enough to make some think twice before cutting someone off or speaking down. And for those who had sat in that courtroom for years, heads low, voices silenced, this moment mattered. Because someone had finally said it out loud. Respect isn't earned by the robe you wear, but by the way you treat the people who walk into your courtroom with nothing but their voice. Sometimes justice doesn't bang a gavel. It sits quietly, takes notes, and waits for the right moment to speak. If this story made you pause, made you think, or reminded you that every word matters, take a second to subscribe. We've got more stories coming. Real ones. Hard ones. The kind that challenge how we see power, dignity, and each other.